Okay, I'll give people a few more moments to join us. But yeah, in the meantime, just as people join us, if you're happy to just put a brief description of who you are in the chat. I think Claire and Simone would find that really helpful.
Yeah, I nearly got it in.
Thank you.
What's this?
Open it. This is soup.
Ruben soup. Oh, did that not fit the one?
We can hear somebody's family chat in the background, which is fine if you want to share it. But maybe people
that'll be me.
Put themselves on mute. Yeah.
Yes, Ruth.
Is it bedtime now, Ruben?
Splish splash. Come in.
Oh wait, I'm not on mute. I'm just turning off the.
Right.
Okay, welcome people. Just give a few more minutes for people to join. And in the meantime, if people are just happy to put a brief description of who they are in the chat, that would be great. Thank you.
Can I just check? Can people hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good, because it has a exclamation mark in the yellow triangle at the bottom, so I wasn't sure whether it worked. But I'll mute now, but that's good to know.
Oh, okay. No, we can hear you, Sam. You're all right. Hi, Keris.
Oh. Hello.
Hi. Okay, it's 35 minutes past, so I think we'll make a start. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming this evening. My name's Anna. I'm an occupational therapist at Sport for Confidence. I also work at the University of Essex. I thought for those of you that are new to our Moving OT events, it might be helpful just to give a brief overview. Moving OTs is kind of part of a wider programme of moving health professionals, and basically we're a space to connect and share good practices with other occupational therapists who are interested in movement and physical activity in particular. And at the moment, we run these sessions online every 2 months, and we have kind of a different topic or a different speaker each time. And in the past, some of you also might have come to the CPD events we hold every month, which are more about an OT and a sports coach kind of sharing some of the strategies and methods they use in practice around physical activity. So This evening, the plan is that we're going to start off with our speakers, who I'll introduce in a moment, and have some time afterwards for questions and discussion. And then after that, if people wanted to stay and are able to stay, I was just going to open the floor for a bit of discussion about the moving OT space and what people would like to use it for. So if you're not able to stay on for that, but you do want to request any particular topics or speakers or anything particular that you think we could be doing within the moving OT space, please just do put it in the chat during the course of this evening, because I'll be saving that and going through it later. Okay, so I'm now really delighted to introduce Claire Pemrick and Simone, who are joining us this evening. Claire is Director of Jumpstart Therapy Centre, and she's also responsible for leading on the development of the EcoSensory therapy model. And Simone is a senior lecturer at the University of Essex, and she has a particular interest in nature-based approaches to occupational therapy and role emerging and third sector contexts as a practice context for occupational therapists. And Claire and Simone and I were recently very fortunate enough to go to the Occupational Science Europe conference in Denmark. And at that conference, there was a particular focus and a lot of interest in nature-based approaches to occupational therapy. And that kind of led us into thinking about bringing some of those ideas back, and particularly sharing some of the work that Claire and Simone have been involved in recently in terms of nature-based approaches to occupational therapy, and sort of thinking particularly about how they might support movement and participation in physical activities. So yeah, I'm delighted to hand over to Claire and Simone. Thank you very much. Thanks, Claire and Simone.
Thanks, Anna.
Thanks, Anna.
Okay, I'll put the slides up. Can everyone see the right slides? Just give me a nod. Yes.
Yes. Thanks, Claire. So we're going to try and coordinate this with Claire changing the slides and me talking to some of them. So just to introduce our talk today, really wanted to kind of just acknowledge that nature-based therapy is a growing area of practice, and it also offers sustainable, accessible and inclusive therapeutic environment, which anybody who's kind of worked in that kind of nature-based environment obviously will know and feel, and that it's sort of a growing area of concern for practice placements as well. I mean, we've really been thinking about how to expand into that, and this was one of the areas that kind of happened a bit by accident, but it was a really great way to develop it. So they are limited and they're growing in relevance, obviously, since COVID, where people really wanted to be outdoors more and needed to be able to kind of spread out and be outside, and also because we're having a lot of problems trying to find traditional setting placements. So that's how this sort of developed. Next slide. Is this one you?
Okay, yeah, sorry. So yeah, we used a kind of guiding framework for doing the placement at Essex Uni. So the idea was really, how can we embed theory into practice? I mean, that's really the purpose of placements anyway, is to really start to put theory into practice. So one of the ideas was that we had the model, the EcoSensory model, as the theory, and we really felt that having the students do the actually experience the actual model for themselves allowed for that kind of embodiment experience. So they actually had, you know, the therapy done to themselves, as it were. So then they could feel what it actually felt like to use the model. So that's the embodiment. And then from that, there hopefully is a change of views on the OT process, and that changes behavior, and then that leads to better outcomes and a build-up of change in theory. Okay, so next slide. So in terms of how we were thinking about placement and why you might want to move, you know, your practice outdoors, why are we even thinking about nature-based OT? And I think OT's always sat really happily within the nature-based environment. You know, there's a lot of OTs who've done horticultural therapy and all types of different types of nature-based therapies, animal-assisted therapies and things like that. But there's a real lack of models to how you translate the OT process into a nature-based practice. And traditionally, therapists, when they're doing nature-based work, are using more kind of clinic-based models that have been based for using indoors and don't really bring in the kind of real special elements that you get from being outdoors. So what are the special elements from being outdoors? Well, there's a huge lot of evidence in terms of the health benefits, and I'll talk to that in a minute. Also, there's a big drive to how you might improve people's pro-environmental behavior by feeling more connected to nature, and I'll talk that. And also, outdoors allows for increased occupational participation, more so than, say, clinic-based OT does at times. So we know that you know, going outside allows for a lot more movement and other activities like that. Okay, so we've spent 99.9% of our evolution in nature. So our bodies, our physiology is entirely adapted to being in the natural environment. It's a weeny tiny 0.1%, probably 0.1111, you know, 0.0001% time that we've actually spent in our buildings, as it were. And even less of that time we've been spending on Zoom and on all these kind of online forums that we're using today. So our whole physiology, down to our very cells, is really adapted to being outside and being in nature. So everyday life, a feeling of comfort can be achieved if our rhythms are synchronized with those in the environment. So it makes a lot of sense that being outside in the natural environment will have benefits to our physiology. And that's really proved in the evidence. And we've been very lucky because places like Japan, where they wanted to protect their natural environments, they started to take doctors out into the forests and start testing people, you know, pre and post periods of times in the forest. Because if you think about Japan, there's a real drive for space and there's more and more urbanization, and they have these very ancient forests. And then there was a bit of a tussle between the forestry commissions who wanted to keep the forest and the, you know, the building developers who want to build more flats. So they really used science to evidence that being out in nature was really beneficial. And since then, more evidence has developed, and there's lots of systemic studies, and we're going to have a whole series of references you can look at. But for example, last year there was one, a systemic review that just looked at the mental health benefits, and they include reduction in depression, reduction in anxiety, improvement in sleep, reduction in anxiety, and a reduction in anger. So, you know, that's from as little as 15 minutes in a natural space. Likewise, there's huge amounts of evidence about the physical benefits of being out in nature. We know that if you're out in nature, you're more likely to move more, so that helps other things. But the meta-analysis also show that there's a decrease in blood pressure, a reduction in incidences of stroke, reductions of hypertension, asthma and heart disease. And there's also and one of the reasons why we think that might be working in that way is because it increases our immunity system as well. So we have more natural killer cells in our body, which are help fight against cancer and promote better well-being otherwise, but also our whole cells have kind of a natural circadian rhythm, and being out in natural spaces rather than under lights and things like that allows us to have a better rhythm with our day. So if we go out in the morning, we have increased melatonin, which means we'll sleep better at night. So naturally, just moving our therapy outdoors, we're already starting to get a huge number of benefits that we don't have to do any work for. Nature just provides that for us. And what's really important to remember is not only is your client or the students, in this case when we're doing the placements, getting the benefits of all that natural killer cells and the rest of it, you as the therapist are. So that makes it a much more sustainable practice in the future. So one of the other things that really we were thinking about in terms of education, and when we're thinking about training our OTs of the future, is about how we can make their practice more sustainable. So we've talked about how they actually going out in nature might be able to sustain it for longer because it's reducing their own stress. I mean, I know I did a EcoSensory session on Monday, and it was a lovely day, and we went to the beach, and then I just felt so great. I just decided to stay at the beach all day and do my work from the beach, you know. So there's that piece, but also what we know is that the more time we spend in nature, it increases what we call nature connectedness, okay? And the more connected we are to nature, here we go, the more likely we are to have pro-environmental behaviors. So we're more likely to protect our natural spaces, and that's one of the reasons why they did so much research in Japan. So that benefits the communities, and it benefits, you know, future generations for, to be able to access nature, but also the species and our reduction and helping support our vision towards the pro-environment and damaging the climate. And we know that the opposite happens when individuals have less access to nature. So if they have less access, if they have no nature exposure, they supposedly have this extinction of experience, which was phrased by Gaston and Saga. And then this reduces your natural occupation in terms of pro-environmental activities, but also just getting out. I know from my own children, who are now teenagers and university students, you know, the less that they are out in nature, the less movement they're doing, the less occupation they're doing, and how much more sedentary they are. And also they're less likely to have that pro-environmental behavior and less likely to protect the natural resources. And we know that the research is saying that children are spending a lot less time out in nature than they used to, and that then just carries on through their generation. So if you spent much less time in nature as a child, then you're much likely to spend less time in nature as an adult. And if we think about it from a real OT perspective, and thinking about why would being out in nature provide, you know, occupational experiences that are meaningful? Well, again, our evolution allowed us to evolve, you know, we developed our occupations out in nature too. And we find occupational activities in nature really rewarding, and because they're based on our basic instincts. So they're based on survival, finding food, avoiding being eaten, you know, building shelter, growing foods, and different activities like that, which we naturally feel akin to our kind of core occupational desires, if that makes sense. We know that other species still do those key things. That's their key kind of, you know, occupations. So we find that nature itself provides these affordances for skill development, creativity, problem solving, which have this natural meaning, and then can contribute to society and community. I was just listening to the radio before I came on about how gardening is as popular as it's ever been. And partly that was from COVID and people thinking about going out in the garden and being useful and doing constructive activities out there. Okay.
So thanks, Claire. So I mean, what Claire was talking about before, in relation to people's exposure to nature and that leading to sort of better, kind of more responsible behaviour around our kind of pro-environmental behaviour, is really supported by our governing bodies. World Federation has set out guiding principles for sustainable practice in 2018. And we also have the position statement on environmental sustainability from 2012. And that really supports us to take OT out into the natural environment and to really help people to think more pro-environmentally in the occupations that they're doing. Supports us really to be taking these types of kind of models to our organizations and saying, look, you know, as OTs, this is our responsibility, this is really where we're going with OT. And so I've just put a couple of main points from those documents. One was really around how we educate ourselves about issues of ecosystem sustainability, where possible, we help with adaptation to conditions caused by the impact of environmental breakdown. So particularly in areas where there's, you know, been environmental crises due to environmental events. Just thinking about sort of Cornwall and around there at the moment, how, you know, this is not stuff that's only happening in other countries. This is stuff that's impacting on us right now, and us thinking about how people feel, you know, how we relate to those environmental issues. Explore and pursue ecological activities that are valued by individuals and communities. So if clients are saying, really want to get outside, you know, loved being in my garden, I really loved walking in the woods, so where they're coming up with kind of ecological and sustainable activities, we should be pursuing those occupations with them as clinicians. How we develop and maintain competencies in empowering sustainable occupations and communities. So this is taking it beyond the individual as well, where, you know, with it saying, let's really try to take this beyond just our sort of very individual client-centered behavior and look at communities and how we can enable this in communities. And one of those ways that we've been kind of doing that here in Colchester is having students in like the Big Garden and places like that, where they're working with communities. They're not just working one-to-one with people, getting more involved with like refugee groups, adults with learning disabilities, people with mental health conditions in these kind of environmental settings. And also re-evaluating our own practice models and looking at kind of, are they embodying these guiding principles from WIFIT, and how can we find new models that really help us to enact these principles from WIFIT.
Okay, so one of the things Simone was saying is that, you know, if our clients are saying that they want to be out and getting out in nature, we should be enabling that in some way. And one of the things that has become quite clear during COVID is that people were wanting to access that outside spaces more. And one thing is that being outside in nature, we see as much more accessible. Simone, were you going to talk more on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the really big things about environmental spaces or kind of outdoor spaces is that they're really accessible to lots of people. I mean, not always. There are people that find the outdoors a lot less accessible, and we do need to acknowledge that. But from a position of being able to get to outdoor spaces, if we can identify them in people's communities. So, for example, when Claire identifies an outdoor space to work with in an EcoSensory model format with someone that she's working with, she'd look for a place to go within their community, which means that they can keep accessing that. So it means that you won't be going to a clinic for 6 weeks and then stop going to that clinic. You'll have that space available to you all the time. So I think that's the thing that's really great about this model, is that you can use it in spaces that you can continue to access, which makes it more sustainable as well. And it's also relatable if people are having that kind of therapeutic input in spaces that they recognize. It feels much more therapeutic to them on an ongoing basis. It really helps people to build a continued connection to the people in that place and as well as that environment.
Okay, so we feel like going out in nature is more inclusive, and the evidence has shown that you can use nature-based practices across the age ranges. So there's research to show it supports children, and most of the work I do is with children and with family groups. And rather than doing kind of family therapy where the family's within a room and then we might be viewing the family through a kind of two-way mirror or something like that, we're out in a space that feels like a space that they can go to at other times, leading on from what Simone was saying. But also we know that adolescents feel much more like they can access those spaces. A lot of the work I do is with teenagers who really enjoy, the ability to move and do their therapy support in that space rather than, we have a pediatric clinic, it feels a bit more childish, so they don't necessarily want to be in that space. But we've also got the research that shows that all the way through adulthood into older adulthood, these spaces really provide those benefits. And the other, if we're looking at gender, we know that men are less likely to access health, services. And the research has shown that they actually were much more likely to access outdoor spaces when that was offered. That felt more in tune with what they wanted to do. And also the neurodiversity populations, we know that the reduced sensory stimulation from being in the forest, reducing their stress and their emotion, allowing for better connection in terms of emotional and social. But one of the key things is, and this kind of leads on from what Simone was saying, is that going out into the forest is a very leveling, non-hierarchical way of delivering therapy. When someone comes to my space, my clinic space, or my hospital, or wherever I'm working as a clinician, they're coming and there's a natural shift in power relationships. So you're coming into a door of another space, and that shift really happens quite quickly. And also, whereas when we go out into relatable natural spaces, especially if they're around their own community, their own space where they can be, there's a much more quality to it. This isn't my woods, this is just the woods, we're just experiencing this together. So there's more shared meaning, and as Simone said, you're more likely to be able to use that in future. So in terms of the placement, we use the EcoSensory model of practice. The EcoSensory model of practice was developed by myself and Chris West, who's another occupational therapist. She's based down in Devon, and Dr. Matt Slavin, who's a clinical psychologist. And really, we started developing the model really just as a training. We just were trying to get more therapists to take their practice outdoors, and as we were starting to develop our own practice outdoors, we really felt that there was a missing link between the evidence base, which was really heavy on why you'd want to take your therapy outdoors, and actually how do you do it. There just really wasn't much kind of learning or experiences or models that allowed you to know how to do it and how to still keep that within your area of practice. And really the EcoSensory model, I kind of came as a gift. I was trying to explain to some commissioners about what the sessions might look like, and this is how the model was really generated. But it was really generated thinking about the evidence and really thinking about why moving your therapy outdoors could be really beneficial, but also drawing into the model pieces that evidence, and but linking it to very specific nature-based environments. So it's one of the very few models, I don't know of any other models, which are there as a practical way for OTs and other clinicians. So we have, you know, lots of psychologists. We just did a talk for the British Psychological Society yesterday. You know, lots of different types of therapists who are using this. And we say the EcoSensory model isn't to replace your other models. So if you're a mental health OT and you're working on a particular mental health area, you might use the EcoSensory model as a bridge between the model that you're doing and being able to take your model out into nature, if that makes sense. So it's integrative. It's based on lots of different kind of theories. We've looked at things like evolutional psychology, ecotherapy, you know, things like the green mind theory, attention restoration theory, you know, stress recovery. I'm a sensory integration trained OT, so there's a huge element of why being in nature and how senses evolved in nature, that's a really core piece of the model, but also things like the gut biome and things like that that really help us to understand how can we actually use that, move our practice outdoors and get the benefits from it. It can be used throughout the lifespan with diverse populations, and it's not forest therapy, although we borrowed a lot of the evidence from the forest therapists. We have people running beach schools, we have people using it for equine therapy, we had someone design a garden that was taken to Chelsea based on the model. So it's really not, it can be used in any kind of natural environment. And in fact, we've had a lot of people who've trained in the model who've used it in indoor settings and just thinking about the individual as a natural being. We are humans, we're not separate from nature, we are part of nature. We've just separated ourselves more and more, but we are natural beings with the natural circadian rhythms and things like that. So we've had someone who worked in a forensic service and used this model specifically with an individual who's only getting 15 minutes of outdoors time in their week, and they were on long-term kind of period in a forensic hospital. So as you can see, it's got 8 different elements, and I'm not going to go through those now because this isn't the place, but you can see it looks at different kind of occupational pieces, but also things that can come from other things. Okay, I'll just move on.
So just in terms of how we integrated this into placement, and it was all quite new, and also there wasn't a lot of time for us to think about how to do it at the time, because we found ourselves really struggling to find placements. It was just when the university had gone back onto campus, and we were really trying to get students back out into kind of normal, not virtual placement settings. And yeah, so it was one of the kind of first placements, which is the Explore placement, which actually made it easier for us in some ways, because it meant that the students had fewer kind of outcomes to, sorry, my nature has just come indoors and I'm trying to keep her away from the laptop. Yeah, they really were focusing on the OT process, which is heavily kind of comes through in the EcoSensory model, which was really great for what we were trying to sort of integrate into the theory. So they completed both the theory and nature immersive practical element of the EcoSensory training in that 4 weeks. So they had some indoor time where they would work their way through the theory, and then we also had some community-based organizations so that they would get some client input. They would be able to go to these organizations and think about how to apply what they've learned in the kind of going through the theory in those places. And then they did a case study that they presented us at the end of 4 weeks. So actually they did an incredible amount of work in 4 weeks for a first placement. And they really produced some very interesting presentations. And so we were really sort of pleased that even though it had pushed them a bit more than, say, some first placements might push you, they really kind of came through and showed us some really interesting case studies at the end. And the community organizations that they went to really enjoyed them. Are you doing this one? I can't remember.
I think you were going to think about
Okay, so yeah, so just in terms of the immersive day, we did take them out on it because the immersive in the kind of normal training is a weekend really, but we didn't really have a weekend to play with, so we took them out on a day in Wivenhoe Woods to show them how to apply some of the practice elements, which Claire will go through with you. But really, we wanted to get them to understand more about how about the regulating impact of nature, to understand how to apply the OT theory without kind of built on material resources, and to look at how they could support their own well-being, because there was all the way through there was a real theme about them being quite new students that were kind of coming in. They were largely international students in a new space, in a new environment, and so thinking about how they could support their own well-being through some of these techniques as well, and then apply them in practice, get them more connected to their own local environment. So really, really close. We did it really close by to the university so they could get there themselves, and think about, you know, sustainability. So how they could link this back to the WFIT guidelines, and also the university and the EcoSensory goals, all around sustainability as well.
So in the immersive day, and typically what we do if anyone's interested in doing the training, the first part, the theory part's kind of online, and then we have a 2-day immersive where people come on the first day. We really take them through the whole model, so they embody and they experience what it's like to go through the different model. So as Simone said, we used in Woods that was local, and that was really important because we wanted them to be able to access that space afterwards. And that's kind of what we try and do in therapy sessions as much as possible, is use spaces that we feel that the individual might be able to access at another time. Like my beach person on Monday, last time I took them to the beach, it was the first time they've been there, and then since then they've been 4 times before this session. Do you know what I mean? So they can carry it on. So we kind of follow the model through the day, and I think we start by using an outcome measure. So we use the profile and mood scores, which we find is a really helpful one to show a shift within the one day, and we really saw that shift. That a lot of the students that came, well, all of them were international students, but mostly they were from very built up places. So from like big Chinese cities, or from Hong Kong, or from places where they didn't have huge access to natural spaces on a day-to-day basis. So we go through the model and do different aspects. I mean, one aspect that I thought was really intriguing to me was we went and climbed a tree. You know, not really high. I've got insurance to let them go up to 5 meters, but I wasn't, well, quickly realized that wasn't going to happen, because I mean, I'd say half of them had never climbed a tree before. So we were actually really working on practice, thinking about where you put your foot. And these are like, you know, young adults, you know, really you would hope would have an idea of how they would motor plan to climb up a tree. I'm really so thrilled that they've done it and had that experience. We do lots of tending tasks, things like listening to different sounds and different noises. We got the hammocks up, and they all had an opportunity to be in the hammock. So you're getting some lovely vestibular stimulation, but also just some real quiet time to be in the here and now. And I think one of the most important moments for me was when I went to ask one of the students, you know, how they were finding it. And there was just this big beaming smile, and said, I know, I thought this was all rubbish, but I totally get it now, because her neurology had totally, and physiology had totally calmed by being in that hammock and having that opportunity. And just really now, you know, that was, you know, going to really shift things. So yeah, that's what the day looked like. I'll just put up the feedback thing. This is what they said about the day. Simone, do you want to do that, or do you want me?
You might have to do it. Sorry, my dogs are now. I'm just going to go and tame all my pets.
She's turning into a little menagerie there. Okay, so these are just some of the feedback, but there was lots, but mostly they were saying, I used to think that nature interventions were just about walking around outdoors, not considering the OT knowledge, because we really looked at that OT piece and the other elements included in the process. So really getting that, you could see that they started to put the theory into practice. I enjoyed it a lot, and I enjoyed learning through the practical way, that embodiment piece, which is really important. It's one of my best days so far. When I went home after the day, I felt very regulated and calmer than usual, which reassured me to the benefits of ecosensory therapy. It had an overall impact on me, as I never knew that or taught nature could be so beneficial. It can be beneficial even for regulation and continuing well-being. So our hopes really is that from this, that the students would then also be able to access these spaces. And one of the nice things about doing the POMs is at the end of the day, they could see the shift in their own arousal and their own mood states, and then how that might be something that they could use in future.
I'm back.
You're back.
Yeah. Yeah, so I mean, overall, we did do an evaluation of the whole placement, not just the immersive day as well. And I think it was, it was really good. The students were able to really think about it overall and think about the kind of critical aspects of it as well. So what went well and what didn't go so well. And so they really had an improved confidence after the placement. They really felt more positive about kind of how they managed their different environments and how they could apply things in different environments confidently. They could see the OT process through the sort of different case studies that they'd presented and through their own experiences. They said it was really useful, that it was practical and immersive. They really enjoyed the kind of going out to the community centres that they went to, and the immersive day, and also felt like there was a kind of that they could sort of see their own self-regulation. They could talk about it in kind of therapeutic language, so using language that they could then use again in future. They also said that it was really intense, which we knew it was going to be, because trying to fit all of that training into 4 weeks was and have a practical element and the immersive was quite a big ask. So one of the things that we would change in future would not make it one of the 4 weeks. In fact, we would go for one of the 8 or 10 week placements. They said that they would really have enjoyed more time to practice putting the theory into practice, obviously, and sort of more application time. And from an educator's perspective, there were quite a few staff members involved in kind of overseeing the students, supervising them, making everything happen, kind of making sure that the students were safe in the community groups that they went to as well. But we could see that they were kind of taking that theory and being able to apply it as they worked through the course material. That they became really adaptable, and that came through as well in their case studies, and they were able to go from kind of classroom to completely outdoors with no material whatsoever, quite easily by the end of the placement, and have lots to think about around that. That they were able to risk assess areas, so kind of not just sort of indoor areas where you would hope that students might be able to start thinking about risk assessing, but thinking about how you might risk assess climbing a tree or walking, kind of wading into a river or mud flats or something like that, which there's quite a lot of them in Willow. And things like their clinical reasoning, obviously wasn't kind of fully formed, but really came through in their case studies as well. So considering that there was a lot of pressure on them to work through all of this stuff and to try and then apply it in theory in placement, they actually did really well in their case studies. We were really impressed with that. And then we also had to think about how this, obviously applied to occupational science, because we took this to the occupational science conference, and really what we, when we looked at it, we really felt that it enabled a really early application in people's careers of thinking about those recommendations and really integrating them from an early stage in practice into their work. They also were able to offer accessible occupation or use an accessible occupation-based model that focused on inclusion and the environment and sustainability. So they were able to kind of pull all those things together from quite an early stage in their education. There was a broadened scope for practice placements in a range of different outdoor settings. So being able to use this model gives us such a wide range of environments that we might be able to apply it in. So we're really excited about the model and being able to kind of work with Claire and Chris and Matt with it and see, how we can develop that in education as well. And also, obviously, based on that, really opened up new areas for research, education, and practice through this kind of quite new model and through a theoretical framework that really thinks about the environment, which we don't really have. We have a lot of the things about the environment in relation to the client, but in the environment in relation to kind of integrating what the client's needs are and what the wider kind of natural environment needs, we don't have a lot of those. So it's really useful to have that as well, and as well as kind of the social inclusion aspects of it.
Okay, we've got a load of references, but you won't be able to read those, but we'll send those out so you can get those. But yeah, that's kind of us done. If anyone wants to ask us any questions, I don't know, Anna, if you've been looking at the chat, if there's any questions.
Yeah, we have got a question in the chat from Nina. She'd really love to hear some more about the case studies the students came up with, if that's possible. She didn't quite understand what they'd done as part of the case studies, so I'd be keen to know.
Good question. Do you want me to answer this, Simone? Are you?
Yeah.
They did two things. They went out and they were in community groups, but also we asked them to look at what the well-being aspect and starting to think about how they could use this in terms of student well-being. So they actually recognized, they put out some adverts, didn't they, within the student community to see if anyone wanted any particular support. I can't quite remember how that worked, but and then they identified a case study of somebody, and they understood that this was a case study, and they used the model to kind of develop what they would do to support that individual in terms of going outdoors and using a natural space, but particularly using the model in terms of an assessment tool, because it has assessment elements to it that you're able to use the model to assess an individual, but also then really thinking in a clinical reasoning way, how can I use the model then to support this person's well-being.
So that was really useful in terms of those early placement kind of objectives, in terms of interviewing someone, all those kind of communication skills, that kind of thing. So that was really great. It was just at the right level for them, and actually for some of the students who'd not really kind of gone out of their comfort zones, they had to find a student to talk to on campus, which was really good as well. And then they also talked about how they'd applied the theory in one of the groups that they'd gone to, so one of the community groups that they'd gone to. So that was an individual case study. It was more of a kind of group protocol type thing where they built that into the group protocol.
And it was just really lovely seeing them present as well. I think that was really, because they were quite new to the to studying as well. It's quite within like the first term, wasn't it, of them being at the university. So having that opportunity to present to their group and to ask each other questions and to challenge each other was really, a very valuable part of the placement. And some of them were so good that I've asked them to be on a EcoSensory kind of, platform. So that's great as well. Was there any other questions in the chat I missed?
Yeah, but I mean, put up your hand if you'd rather, or put into the chat. I think I've got yes from Louise. Have you got Sorry, lost it. Where's it gone?
Have you got future in-house developments for this approach?
Yeah.
So we haven't enacted them yet, but yes, we do. Yeah, so I mean, it would be really exciting actually to think about how to use it for one of the longer placements. Yeah, so and one of the more like 8 or 10-week placements I think the challenge was trying to find community groups that they could then work with as well, that were free at the same time, and then trying to find long arm supervisors for those as well. So it's a lot about kind of organization and timing, but it does mean that it does mean you can take sort of 3 or 4 students at once, or a kind of group of students, and they can work together, which I thought was really good, and they could support each other in that.
There's a question in the chat, where do you get your referrals from? So I think that's probably for you, Claire, in terms of your clinical work. I don't know if you're able to.
Yeah, I mean, at Jumpstart, we were a pediatric service, so we get our referrals from everywhere. So I think, we've been around for a long time, so that helps. But we get referrals from the NHS, we get referrals from specific groups like the CRIS team in Suffolk, who, mental health crisis team. We get referrals from the adoption support services. We're an adoption support agency, so get a lot of referrals from them. We get referrals from schools. We get referrals from, and we get private referrals as well. But the majority of our work is funded somehow by statutory services in some way. I'd say a very, very small percentage of the work we do is independent of any kind of funding. So yeah, and more we get more and more requests. So we do get our referrals from all different places. And typically we will do an OT assessment that and then if we feel that there's a specific reason that the EcoSensory model is the most beneficial model to use with that client group, we'll use the EcoSensory model. So for example, we use it a lot with fathers and sons. That's quite often a very key area where they don't really feel so comfortable coming into the therapy space. It might be that the individual really loves the nature-based work, or they're an adolescent and they feel that the gym just feels a little bit childish. Or we do a lot of work with parents on their own, and they find that as a hugely regulating space to be able to go and do some reflective work out in nature. So yeah, lots of different places we get referrals from.
There's a question from Jack about the training. Claire, do you want to go through that?
Yeah, and I probably should have had some links put in, which I'll try and put in when you go on to the next piece. So we have an online training, and it's really immediately accessible. So if you go on to our ecosensorytherapy.com website, I'll put it in the chat as well in a bit. You can see all our different trainings. We do kind of like a little something very similar to what we've done tonight, where we kind of introduced the model. We do those talks quite often, and then what typically we're now having it so it's instant access for people. So once they've decided that they want to do the training, that they can go on, and the theory part is online, and it's about 24 hours worth of training. People love it. I'm very biased, but I think most of the people who've done it find it really, really quite detailed, and they get a lot from it. We have check-ins. So every month we have a Zoom webinar that people can come into and meet other practitioners, and that includes practitioners who've completed the training and have some supervision around it. So they'll have that piece. And then we encourage people to come on the immersive 2 days, which the next one's happening this weekend. So I'm going to spend the weekend in the forest this weekend with the people who are already on the cohort. Yeah.
There's quite
Sorry,
this question around the kind of risks of the outdoors. Absolutely. And thinking about that, just thinking, It would be the same, I think, as sort of taking, I mean, I worked in brain injury and kind of neuro quite a lot as a clinician, and it would take people out to Tesco's and walks along the river, things like that. And I would say there's no more risks than that kind of activity where you'd have, and the ecosensory therapy model does have a risk assessment that you can work through quite systematically. The other thing that I would say is that if you practice in an area where you see lots of clients in that area, you could have already risk assessed the actual environment of those spaces quite a lot, and then you'd be able to do a kind of more personal risk assessment with whoever you were taking there. So sometimes some of that risk assessment is already done. So for example, so it would be the same as if you were taking them to a shopping centre or something like that. So I guess, Claire, I don't know if you have any more to say on that, but
yeah, I mean, I think that was the really fundamental piece for me when I first started taking my therapy outdoors. It's like, risk, oh my gosh, I felt really frightened about, taking therapy outdoors. It just seemed quite a terrifying thing. And I think, and when we talked like yesterday to the British Psychological Society, one of the things we are asking is what would be your roadblocks for taking therapy outdoors. And that's why in the training we really focus really heavily on risk assessment, but we also look at the risk benefit analysis and how you make those analyses, and you're really thinking dynamically about the risk and the benefits, because we often prevent ourselves from doing things because we're so keen to kind of protect ourselves. But we've got Baylands insures people for ecosensory therapy once they've done their practitioner training. As I said, I'm insured to allow someone to climb up to 5 meters, so there's lots of different actually where I can really cover my back and make sure I've done all the risk assessments and things like that. Another thing that comes up quite often is about confidentiality. And actually, I think there's a false assumption that a client coming to our centre, our hospital, once they come into our room, yes, it might be lovely and confidential, but how did they get there? They had to get on the bus, or they had to drive their car and park it in our car park and walk into our centre and wait in the waiting room, and all these other places where they might meet someone where it's absolutely clear why they're there. Do you know what I mean? Because it says on the door what that place is. Whereas if I'm meeting someone in the forest or down at the beach, I could just be a friend having a walk and stuff like that. So we think about that quite seriously. I'm not trying to dismiss it, but I think we also kind of, just because we're used to working in the clinic space, that doesn't mean that those spaces are without the same kind of safeguarding, confidentiality and risks that we might have in the nature spaces. So yeah, but you definitely need to do your risk assessments, and you definitely need to take a first aid kit and do your first aid training. Those are things that I would never recommend you don't do.
Thank you. That was a really thorough answer. And, I'm totally on board with it, but I can imagine that some people may think that is too risky, I'm not going to do it. And yeah, so I like that you've taken the question of roadblocks to other people as well. Thank you. Yeah. It's been really interesting.
And I think actually that's shifted so much in the last 5 years. I think when we first started doing this, people were much more wary of the risks. But I think COVID and suddenly being inside was so high a risk, and people were starting to take their therapy outside because that was less risky suddenly, that allowed for people to start to be thinking in a slightly different way. So I think that's been helpful.
Simone, I think there's a question we might have missed here for you. I'm not sure who it's from because it just says Zoom user, but I'm wondering if this is an Essex student. Someone's asked, are you planning on having placements for second years this year? Perhaps someone who is a second year and quite likes the sound of it, I'm wondering.
I haven't got that far yet. I'm still trying to get through welcome week. I'm operating purely on like a week by week basis at the moment. But I mean, I don't at the moment. I think where the sort of stars collide, like we've got a community organisation that's happy to take the students and in order to apply their theory, or a clinic or something like that, or a school or something like that where we can apply the theory. And we've got enough of Claire's time to be able to co-opt her for a bit. You know, so I think it is one of those situations where we have to sit down and kind of plan it. But yes, we'd be really interested in running it fairly soon, I would say, while it's still fresh in our minds.
It's Priscilla. Hello, Priscilla, that asked that question. Thank
Great.
you. Thanks, Simone. I think at the moment in the chat, everything else is more of a comment. Someone's saying they're very interested and would really like to learn more, so they could introduce the model into their long COVID service. That's Sally.
Yeah, great.
Oh, I've got another one. Yes, someone else saying that's really inspired them for their second year assignment. So that's brilliant. Yeah, any other questions if people want to put in the chat or raise their hand?
Just one little thing I'd say is if any students here are really interested in doing some research on it, you know, come and talk to me, you know, email me and stuff, because, you know, if you want to do it as your dissertation or something like that, we have lots of research opportunities for people to do things. So, you know, yeah.
Yeah. Great, thank you. Thanks.
Would the
Claire.
next step to be the sewing seeds? Yeah, definitely. That fills up really quickly. We offer 100 places and they always go, believe it or not. So yeah, I would go and doing. Would be interesting with research students of other unis. Yes, definitely. So there you go. We've got we had one of the lecturers from Ulster's done our training and done some work over there. We're hoping to wheedle our way into the masters in Europe. And then Barcelona contacted us, so we've had quite a lot of other universities who are interested. But obviously Essex is our favourite. I have to say that.
Make sure you get that in, Claire.
Sorry.
Yes, we can email the PowerPoint presentation, and we'll also make the recording available as well for people who did want to listen again, or weren't, if you've got colleagues who you think actually might quite like to listen but perhaps weren't able to come tonight. Jack just asked here, if you haven't trained in sensory integration, would that put you at a disadvantage?
Absolutely not. And also, if you have trained in sensory integration, you're going to learn it in a completely different way. We've got loads of non-OTs who do this. We have teachers doing it, social workers, we have all types of professionals who do the training. And the idea of the training is that it allows you to do what you do. So if you're a teacher, you still go out and teach, but we do these extra bits that help you get there, you know. And likewise, if you're an OT who wants to work in that kind of environment, we really look at the sensory element in lots of details, but we look at it from an evolutionary perspective, which is quite different from the way you would learn that in other sensory integration kind of trainings.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you.
Is it okay to use any of the images from slides for reflection? Yeah, I'm not sure about the
I think definitely not if they've got people in them. If you can't see the people, like I would say the hammock one might be okay, Claire. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm fine about that. I mean, I suppose the only question is how the model one might be being used in other ways. We're kind of a little bit protective of that. Do you know what I mean? Because yeah, how would you reference it, Simone?
Same way you would reference it. Claire, I think probably is your manual. You could reference your manual.
Yeah.
So we
Like
could
that.
do that. But
they
you
could recommend. Can't they reference our presentation?
You can reference a website. Yeah.
Yeah. Reference the EcoSensory therapy website would probably be the best way. There's a question here about, has the model been applied to people living with dementia at all?
Yes, a lot actually, because a lot of older adults find that the natural environments are really, really the places that they enjoy being. So we have had a lot of people who are working with older adults who've used this model. And if you're thinking from a sensory perspective, how you can use all the different senses and things like that, but also just movement. This is the moving OT course, you know, just getting outside. and it just bringing up so many support. So yeah, definitely been using a lot with dementia.
One of the student case studies was with a dementia group as well, I think, and that was really and that was where they managed to work out how to bring the outdoors inside for them, because it was kind of quite cold and wintry still when we did it, and they managed to do some of that inside.
I think that's what I've loved so much about. We've been teaching the course for 3 years now, and I think the thing that's been so exciting for me is how many different places it's been applied in. You know, I think, you know, I really thought it was just going to be SIOTs who started doing it, and then before you know it, we've got marine biologists doing it, and garden designers, and you know, we've got people all around the world doing it, you know, in New Zealand and Canada and America and, you know, Norway, all sorts of places, you know, and that because we're all natural beings, do you know what I mean? And that's the bottom line. None of the people you work with are not a natural being. Everybody is a natural being. So it doesn't matter if they're a child or an older adult, or, you know, or in a cell, you know, they're still a natural being. Oh, I think I just did it to one Zoom user, my email. I might just, if anyone else wants my email, I'll just put my Jumpstart one. I'm notoriously bad at getting back to people. That's just because I get a lot of emails. But and I have 1,000 flagged emails at the moment that I need to access. So if you do email me and I don't get back to you, email me again. It's just a way of chucking you up the flagged emails.
There is the info one for EcoSensory therapy, a good one for them to get hold of as well.
It's a good one for any kind of general EcoSensory questions. I'll just put that one in there. I think it's that. I think it's that.
That one doesn't solely rely on you, does it?
No. We have an administrator who will get to those ones. And then send me a jog as well. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much. If anyone's got any last questions, please do put up your hand or put them in the chat, or indeed email Claire as she suggested and put the emails in the chat there. But I just want to say a massive thank you to Claire and Simone, because I think, you know, you can see from the amount of discussion and already the comments that people are sharing in the chat that this has been a really thought-provoking and inspiring session. I know I just find your work really interesting in terms of really thinking about the potential for outdoors and nature-based approaches. So it's been brilliant to have you with us tonight for the Moving OT session. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thank you for inviting us. I hope we're doing other sessions.
Yes, yes. If people are able to stay, then please do stay. I'm just going to shift now into a bit more of a general evaluation of the Moving OTs programme. It would be great to get people's thoughts about how they'd like Moving OTs to move forward, whether you find these kind of events useful, whether you'd like something else as well, or something slightly different, or a different day. So if you're able to stay on, please do. If you're not and you have any particular feedback, do please just share it in the chat, because I will be going through that later. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. I'm going to hop off, but thank you.
Thank you. Thanks ever so much, Claire and Simone. Really great to have you with us. Thank you. Thanks.
Really good to meet all of you. I hope to see you again. Lovely to see lots of faces that I recognise as well.
Yes, yes.
Meet new faces. All right then. Bye.
Thank you. Bye. Great. Thank you, those of you that are able to stay on for a few moments. For those of you that joined us a bit later, I did do a bit of an explanation at the start for what Moving OTs is.